U.S. State Department issued a stop work order on Friday for all existing foreign assistance and paused new aid. And that's according to a cable seen by Reuters after President Trump ordered a pause to review if aid allocation was aligned with his foreign policy. The cable, drafted by the department's Foreign Assistance Office and approved by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, said waivers have been issued for military financing for Israel and Egypt. No other countries were mentioned in the cable. Now, the move risks cutting off billions of dollars of life-saving assistance. The U.S. is the largest single donor of aid globally. In fiscal year 2023, it disbursed $72 billion in assistance. Just hours after taking office on Monday, Trump ordered a 90-day pause in foreign development assistance pending a review of efficiencies and consistency with his foreign policy, but the scope of the order was not immediately known. Well, joining us now for a chat on Donald Trump's order cutting aid and how this will affect Nigeria and what programs are likely to be impacted is Executive Director of Yaga Africa and convener of the Not Too Young to Run movement, Sam Itodo. Sam, it's great to have you on Newsday. Many thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Now, let's make this relatively personal. How does this decision affect Nigeria?
Well, this decision affects Nigeria and other African countries and also countries across the world in a lot of ways. It will disrupt, development programs being implemented, whether by public institutions or by state institutions. So when you look at Nigeria, the U.S. have been a long supporter of health initiatives, either around HIV and AIDS, through the PEPFAR fund, or you look at the humanitarian assistance, which actually takes a large chunk of U.S. support to Nigeria and a support to humanitarian organizations, as well as humanitarian issues in the northeastern part of the country, as well as the southern part of the country. So there are lots of, development programs implemented with U.S. support. If you look at U.S. support to Nigeria's democracy, it has really contributed to the advancement of our democratic process, either through support to INEC, support to civil society organizations to continue to advance democratic values, continue to promote credible elections, or deepen the technical capacities of not just civil society organizations, but INEC as a body, including political party development programs. So to a large extent, this would really disrupt this program. However, it's a 90 days freeze. And the silver lining there is that some of these programs will be reviewed and assessed to align with the President Trump's priorities. And there are three fundamental questions. It's whether those interventions make America safer, whether they make America stronger, and whether they make America more prosperous. And so it's an evolving situation. We are all watching to see what's going to happen. But I think from experience, I really don't expect to see a fundamental shift, because I've seen situations where some of these programs, when they are reviewed, they are assessed, they might be repositioned. But one of the concerns will be around issues relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whether some of the programs that get toward enhancing women's empowerment or youth inclusion or inclusion of macro or micro nationalities will be sustained. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. Will this cause some disruptions? Yes, it will. But I think that it's an opportunity for resilience on the part of local institutions.
Fantastic. And I'm glad we're talking about what needs to be done on the local front. Because if you look at this issue holistically, when you hear from American voters who voted for Donald Trump, they will argue that, well, they don't really want their hard-earned tax money to be spent in such a way on many occasions. So for me, I just want to look at us, our own issues internally. How did we get to this situation where so many governments of the world have become dependent on aid, when we're preaching trade, not aid? But you look at a country like Nigeria that's enjoying almost $1 billion in aid per annum from the United States. What is it that we need to do internally so that such critical sectors such as health, agriculture, education are not dependent on American aid?
Absolutely, and I totally hold the view that as a country or as a continent, we can't continue to depend on development aid to advance our development. Yes, development aid can, you do what? It can complement, but we cannot build our development framework based on aids from international or multilateral institutions, because they come with certain conditions that may not in any way advance national interest. And when you ask, the question, the truth is, when you look at countries in the global south, there's that geopolitics and tension between countries in the global south, or what you call the global north, because of the spate of development. But I don't even want to make excuses. The point is, how can a country like Nigeria, with all the resources that it has, why is it difficult that we cannot leverage, our resources to advance our development? Why do we have to constantly depend on aid on specific related issues? And I think that it's a call, to action for Nigeria and African governments, including other countries in the global south, to do three things. The first is, if we're going to come to the negotiating table, we're going to come to the table mindful of the value that we bring to the table, because we've got the human and the natural resource. In terms of the intellectual capital, we have what it takes. This is a country that, has 3 of the top richest men on the continent. This is a country that has, a thriving technology sector. So when Trump talks about, America being a superpower when it comes to AI, even in Nigeria has got techies and software developers. We've seen, this migration of some of our best assets, human assets, to other parts of the world. So can we tap into that and see how we use our own resources to advance our development? The second is about local philanthropy. And this is one part that is, yes, evolving, but it speaks to whether the richest men that we have in our country and the richest organizations are able to contribute their resources to advance things like human rights without interfering or encumbering on the independence of those organizations because of some vested political interest. And for me, the third part is for those of us who work in the development space, this is also a time to begin to think about, are there new ways that we can fund our development? And I know that on the continent, there are several heads of states who are having deep conversations about how to look for innovative ways of financing our development. But at the heart of this, it boils down to the fact that people will always seek to protect their interests. And I think it's time for us, both as Africans as Nigerians, to think about our interests first, but also mindful of the fact that we cannot exist in isolation. That is the essence of global partnership. That's the essence of multilateralism, but it's a multilateral relationship and bilateral relationship that advances the interest of both parties, and not one that continues to perpetuate this asymmetry of power that we see between nations across the world.
Well said. I also appreciate the fact that you said that what you mentioned about isolation, that's not what the goal is. But I'd like to ask, on a relatively positive note, still talking about how this impacts Nigeria, how might this push Nigeria to improve its governance structure and transparency measures to attract more diverse forms of investment?
Absolutely. I think this is a huge opportunity. For me, I'm not particularly bothered about what's currently happening. I think that if anyone who is serious about the future of Nigeria and also the future of the continent of Africa, this is a wake-up call, but I'll say we've been here before. So I'll call it a wake-up reminder that first we need to strengthen our governance systems. We need to ensure that we uphold the rule of law, because if you're going to ask people to come invest in your country, they will be concerned about whether the rule of law is protected, to the extent that if there is a deviation or an infraction on contractual agreements, that there is a justice system that will protect the interest of those investments. You also want to look at human rights. Do people feel free in their country? Because if people are not free in their country, they will look for other ways of putting pressure on the state. And so government needs to see this as an opportunity to, yes, whilst we talk about harnessing our potential to advance our development, that there are certain commitments that government needs to make and it needs to fulfill to the people. And it's about the rule of law, it's about respect for fundamental freedoms, and also upholding constitutionalism. But also at the heart of this is you've got to foster national integration. Because if political leaders are going to leverage effective language to mobilize citizens around a common national agenda, then they have to recognize that we are a diverse nation, and you need to promote inclusion, that no part of society should feel excluded by virtue of a policy or by virtue of a stance of a particular political leader, that this country belongs to us all, and we have a role to mobilize everyone to have a seat at the table. Not just a seat at the table, but that when they speak, we first recognize the contributions that people are making and not shut them down on the basis of where they come from or the language that they speak.
Sam Itodo of Yaga Africa, it's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. We hope to keep this conversation going and also prompt our own leaders to do what needs to be done so we don't have these meltdowns whenever there are issues with aid. Thank you so much.